One of my biggest gripes with watching videos on how to make a simple crosscut sled like this is the fact that everybody tries to outsmart the previous guy by adding features and things that you generally just don't need. And then you end up with yet another jig or something that you need to store somewhere, and no, this is not going on the wall. And that's perhaps the one thing I like the most about this particular sled. And I'm not going to spoil it for you just yet, so let's quickly build this and then I'm going to show you where I'm going to store this. I'm going to start this project by gluing up the front and the rear fence. And yes, I'm not wearing any shoes because this is 9:30 at night and I was just sitting inside and I thought to myself, if I glue this up now, it's got enough time to dry. So tomorrow morning when I actually start with this project, don't have to do this and it's ready to go. So these are 30 inches by 2 1/4. And I'm going to glue 2 sheets together for the front and the rear, and then I'm going to use my spirit level as a straight edge and just clamp that together, and hopefully that dries perfectly straight. For the base of the sled you can use 3/4 inch thick plywood, but I do have some leftover form ply after making my workbenches, and I kind of like the black as well, so let's see how that turns out. These just came out of the clamps and I'm pretty happy with that. As you can see, it's perfectly flat, both of them, so very, very happy with that. Now, we need to decide how big we're going to make this base. If it's too big, I'm probably not going to use it. If it's too small, I probably can't use it for most things. So for this one, I'm going with 30 inches by 17 inches. Next up, let's talk about the runners and the different options. The most common and easiest solution is to use plywood, and you would typically just cut that to fit this slot and make sure that it sits nice and snug, but not too tight so that it'll still move. This, for example, has too much play in it and needs to be redone. And then obviously you want to make sure that this top level is just below the surface here. And then the base of your sled will pretty much just attach to that, and that creates your runner. Another option that I've used in the past is regular T-track, and that just fits in there and it slides pretty easily. Sometimes it's a little bit loose, so you just need to do a tiny bit of adjustment just to move them inwards so that they perform like a bit of a clamping action on the inside edge here. But that works pretty well too. But honestly, the best option in my opinion is something like these miter bars. And they don't even have to be the expensive ones. These ones I got from Temu, and I think I paid something like $8 for it, which is really cheap. And these things are purposely made for this. Now, these come with adjustable screws, so if they do happen to sit a little bit loose or you need to make an adjustment, you just tighten these and it expands and they'll fit just perfectly. So if you can, get some of these. To get the exact center of where your board needs to be, it's pretty easy. All I'm going to do is take half the width of the board, which in my case is 15 inches, which is exactly there. So 15 inches lines up with the middle of the blade. Then I'm just going to move this fence over like this and then lock that in place. And then when I take my board like this, butt it up against the fence here and then just drop it down, and that's exactly in the middle. Now I know exactly where these two need to be fixed on the bottom of this board. Easy. Obviously, you need to mark and drill your holes from the bottom side, so good old double-sided tape to the rescue. That's just going to make it so much easier just to flip this around, and those runners are going to be in exactly the right place, so easy to drill and screw them down. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you've got any questions or suggestions, leave them down below in the comments. Before we're going to mount these fences, I just want to clean up these edges and just make sure everything is nice and square. And while I got this set up, I thought I might as well cut 2 more strips to the same size, and that's going to be for the blade guard on the back. And I'm going to cut those into blocks of about 5 inches wide. So these blocks are going to be the ones for the guard for the blade, like that. But what I'm going to do is glue 2 of them together like that and the other 2 like this. So that way I only need to do 2 screws and another 2 screws instead of 8 screws. Just to get rid of these very sharp corners, I'm just going to use something round like this. Draw a line, and then I'm going to go to my belt sander and just sand that down. Now for my next magic trick, I'm going to glue and screw the back fence to the base. And I've actually flipped this around just so it's easier to clamp on this side. Now, just one thing to remember is that you need to countersink those holes so that the screw heads sit flush or just below the surface on the bottom of the sled. All right, next up, we're going to do a cut through the back panel and just about 2/3 into this side. Now remember, we still need to add these blocks in here. That's going to be the guard for the blade. So what I want to do is also not mount it all the way flush to the front, because if this moves in any way, it's going to stick over the edge and it's just going to be irritating. So what I do is I just move it back slightly so there's a little bit of a gap showing on this edge here. Something like that is fine. And then what we're going to do is just mount one screw on the bottom on this side, and that will act as a pivot so that we can set this perfectly 90 degrees with the blade. So this now pivots, and we can use a square to line that up perfectly with the blade, check both sides and do some test cuts, and then we can fix that in place. Now, when you get to this point, make absolutely sure that your saw is unplugged. Don't want any nasty accidents. And then when I'm measuring this, I'm going to make sure that the edge of the blade actually touches the metal on this side and not the actual teeth. So just spin the blade around until it goes between the teeth right there, touching the metal. And then you pretty much just line this up so that you get it as close as possible to square with the blade itself. Now we just gently move this back without moving anything, and then we're going to clamp and screw that into place. But as things generally go when I'm multitasking, I actually forgot to cut a little chamfer on the front of this fence. And that's just going to help with dust lying on top. So if you actually push something up against the fence, it's not going to make it not sit flush with the fence, if that makes any sense. So I pretty much had to redo this whole step of lining up the fence with the blade. Just remember, if you do have to do this and you already put the screw in on the other side, you actually do need to drill a new hole and put a new screw in, else it's not going to be square. Next, I just want to do a test cut on this piece of timber just to see how close I am to being square. But one thing to keep in mind though is that there is no screws on the bottom here to support this piece yet. So you want to make sure you don't actually push on this, because it might cause a little bit of a bow and throw this piece out, which will obviously not give you accurate results. So let's do one test cut on this piece and just see how that goes. That's what it looks like. And if I flip it around this way and rejoin them, that looks pretty much perfect in my opinion. It's more than adequate for what I want to do. But if you want to do the 5-cut method, you can go ahead and dial it in even further. But I'm just going to leave it at that. Now that I'm happy with that, I'm just going to flip this over and then countersink some holes and screw it down. Obviously not going to use any glue because you might want to move that in the future. A lot of similar designs like this tend to use bracing that goes from one side to the other, which would typically look something like this. Having it open like this means I can just take my piece of timber, place it down, and it's ready to go, instead of having to feed it in underneath the bracing. Also, I'm just going to use a piece of timber like this for a stop block, and that I can move anywhere I like, and setting that up is literally as quick and easy as that. Something I tend to do all the time when I'm working with a pencil or a measuring tape is, after I've used it, I'll just take it and put it somewhere, and then I'll spend ages looking for it. So why not use this space at the back here and just create something where you can put those while you are working. As far as storage goes, I don't have wall space to hang this, so just came up with something really simple and practical, and it looks like this. Overall, I've got a tendency to overcomplicate things for myself, which is exactly why I set out to make this as simple and as straightforward as possible, so pretty much anybody can make this. Which is also why I made this clamp rack as simple and as straightforward as possible. So if you haven't seen that yet, I'll catch you on that one.